Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm from Graham. Ahead today, some provinces in Canada moving to lift their COVID-19 vaccine mandates and restrictions after protests by truckers. And here in the U.S., many parents have been incredibly frustrated by mask mandates for children in schools. One family even moving to another state. Should the U.S. be involved in the crisis in Ukraine? Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tells CBN News why he believes the answer is yes. Plus, charges of fraud in the 2020 presidential election, and the former Vice President Mike Pence taking a strong stand about what he could and could not do.
I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president.
Now there's a bipartisan push in Congress to prevent conflicts over elections. With the big game just days away, we go behind the scenes of a football film. The incredible story of a Rams quarterback who went from stocking shelves to Super Bowl champion.
It is a rags to riches story to some degree, but there's so much more involved in the story, and the relationships that were built, the relationship that sustained the entire journey.
And the Super Bowl Breakfast, where faith and football meet. We'll look at this annual event and hear from a Bart Star Award winner, Demario Davis.
When you just trust God and you lean into Him, He'll make everything else work out the way that it's supposed to.
Those stories and more today from the CBN Newsroom.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We'll begin today in Canada, where some provinces have announced they are rescinding their COVID vaccine mandates after Canadian truckers have staged protests against the mandates, blocking key areas along the U.S.-Canadian border and paralyzing part of the country's capital of Ottawa. Fox News reports the provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Quebec are moving to lift their restrictions. Truckers in the U.S. are also organizing a protest where participants will drive across the country from California to Washington, D.C. Also in the United States, mask mandates in schools have proven to be among the most contentious debates of the pandemic. Now that new cases are dropping in certain states, masks are starting to come off as well. Still, many states aren't willing to do away with the mandates just yet. Some parents are taking action not only by speaking up, but moving out to states with fewer restrictions. Charlene Aaron has the story.
Several governors are taking an about-face when it comes to requiring masks in public schools, citing the rapid drop-off in COVID-19's Omicron surge. Even as the mandates come to an end, some fed-up parents say the move is too little, too late.
We're not going to manage COVID to zero. We have to learn how to live with COVID as we move from a pandemic to the endemic phase of this virus.
The end to the mandates in New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware, and Oregon will take effect between now and the end of March, depending on the state.
It's kind of early to say that. I think if it was to be today, I wouldn't be in favor of it. I think wearing the mask is for your overall protection.
My thoughts are they're not good because I'm never breathing in them.
The statewide mask mandate in New York, once ground zero for the pandemic, is set to expire Thursday. Governor Kathy Hochul is expected to keep it in place for city schools. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky cautions against lifting the requirements, saying the country isn't out of the woods yet.
We still have hospitalization rates that are higher than they ever were during the peak of our Delta wave, and similarly for deaths, still at 2,300 a day. I don't think we're there right now. I know people are cautiously optimistic.
Still, the battle playing out in various ways across the country. In Chicago, a group of students recently walked out of class after being told to mask up. Masking and other COVID restrictions leading some families to leave blue states for red. Texas, Florida, and Arizona, all Republican-led states, have banned mask mandates. They're now seeing a surge in new residents. Carol Markowitz, a lifelong New Yorker, relocated her family to Florida.
My, at the time, 5-year-old, now he's 6, has never been in school without a mask. And I see delays in him. I see that he's not at the same level where his siblings were at this point. We basically moved to Florida because of him.
She sees a big difference.
It's very, very good. My kids go to school maskless every day. They haven't seen their masks since we landed in Florida. You don't even realize what you've lost until you see normal elsewhere.
Meanwhile, more states may follow suit in lifting mask mandates now that school-aged children are eligible for vaccinations. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
The Biden administration has sent troops to Eastern Europe to try to prevent a Russian invasion of Ukraine. That move has many Americans asking if it's in our country's best interest to get involved. One American who believes the United States should be involved is former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He says protecting Ukraine is vital to our own country's economy. And he thinks that President Biden's weak foreign policy is enabling Vladimir Putin. Here's CBN's David Brody.
At this point, the biggest question remains, will President Vladimir Putin invade Ukraine?
No one knows the answer to that question. He may not even know at this point. He's racking and stacking. He's performing pretty elegant, rational math for himself to say, I want to have more political influence, more control in my near abroad. He feels still that the Soviet Union was a great thing, and he wants to restore as much of it as he can.
Is there a moral obligation to stop him?
So America's always had a strong belief that we wanted to support other democracies. Part of it's moral, part of it's our understanding of human dignity and the value of every human life, David. But part of it's just plain old importance to American national security. They are twin pillars.
And another pillar is the American economy, something Pompeo believes could be directly affected.
Almost a third of the wheat, red winter wheat that travels across the world, comes out of Ukraine and Russia and goes through the Black Sea, the very thing that is being threatened by Vladimir Putin. These things matter to the global food supply. If you're living in the outskirts of Las Vegas or Bakersfield or in Tennessee or Georgia or in the upper Midwest, you depend on these stable food supplies.
The former Secretary of State and CIA director believes it is the Biden administration that helped create this mess in Eastern Europe.
The United States enabled this, and that's just most unfortunate, David.
When you say enable that, explain exactly what you mean.
There's so many pieces to this. Deterrence is about mindset. It's about convincing your adversaries that you are serious and determined. And so, President Biden goes to meet with Vladimir Putin to talk about the fact that he shut down an American pipeline for gasoline in our country and says, don't do that again. No other costs imposed.
There's a lot of folks in America, tens of millions, that have no trust in Biden whatsoever, that he's going to bungle this one, too.
So I pray that they get it right. I want good things for them. This isn't about R's and D's. This is about America. I hope they get it right.
China's watching this, and do you believe they're seeing weakness from the Biden administration on this?
Well, of course they are. The whole world can observe that weakness. Yeah, Xi Jinping's doing his math too, not just with respect to Taiwan, with respect to running spies inside the United States.
If Trump, by the way, was president, would Putin dare even try any of this?
I can only say as a faithful Christian, I can only say I don't know, but I can tell you that he didn't.
Despite tough words on Biden's handling of Putin and Russia, he does like the decision to go after ISIS's top leader.
The world is safer as a result of him no longer being part of it. So congratulations to the Biden team for getting that done. It's not the end. The threat from radical Islamic terrorism remains, but it's always good when you can, in a way that we did, reach out, take down leadership of these terror networks. You make more difficult for them to bring that terror to our homeland.
David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Coming up, Republicans divided over events of January 6th. That comes as an old law about how elections are decided is back in the spotlight after the questions over the 2020 presidential race. And what's being done to prevent any confusion in future elections? We're going to explain it all when we come back. The Senate's top Republican Minority Leader Mitch McConnell blasted the Republican National Committee over censuring two Republicans after the RNC formally censured Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger for their work on the January 6th Select Committee. McConnell shot back, saying that is not the job of the RNC to single out members of the Grand Old Party. McConnell had a completely different view of the RNC resolution, which described those involved in the January 6th attack as engaging in legitimate political discourse.
It was a violent insurrection for the purpose of trying to prevent the peaceful transfer of power after a legitimately certified election.
A key factor in the events of January 6th was the question surrounding the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. Now, a small bipartisan group of lawmakers is looking to reform one standalone bill which deals with that issue. It is called the Electoral Count Act. Caitlin Burke explains why this is important.
In short, the Electoral Count Act lays out how Congress should count electoral college votes from each state, especially when there's a dispute. That happened in the 1876 presidential election.
There were a lot of allegations of fraud in that election. 4 states ended up sending 2 different slates of electors to Congress.
A decade later, the Electoral Count Act established a joint session of Congress to oversee the counting of electoral votes. During that process, any written objection to the votes from at least one House member and one senator sends lawmakers back to their respective houses to consider the objection. The power to sustain or overrule it is placed fully with Congress. That played out after the 2020 election. The law is back in the spotlight because former President Donald Trump and others insist Vice President Mike Pence had the power to throw out certain election results.
They were hoping that there would be objections made under the act by a member of the House and member of the Senate to the electoral votes coming from particular states, places like Georgia and Arizona, and then there would be a debate about whether they should be sustained or overruled. They were all overruled. And so the vice president did not have the power to then somehow change what the Senate had decided and what the House had decided. I think there were folks hoping he would do that, but he just didn't have the power to do it, neither under the statute nor under the Constitution.
Hans von Spakovsky, an election integrity expert with the Heritage Foundation, says the vice president's role in certifying election results is purely ministerial, which means he really doesn't have any power at all, a point Pence himself recently addressed.
I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president.
While Spakovsky sees 2020 as an example of the Electoral Count Act working, a bipartisan group of lawmakers feel the law needs to be clarified.
We saw on January 6th of 2021 how ambiguities in the law were exploited. We need to prevent that from happening again.
What really caused the insurrection? They thought there was a kind of ambiguity, if you will, and there was an avenue they could go through and maybe overturn the election, because it was not clear. And when one congressman and one senator can bring a state's authentic count to a halt, it's wrong.
Senator Manchin says he's confident a bill reforming the Electoral Count Act will pass. Spakovsky disagrees, saying an amendment would not have prevented what happened on January 6th.
Many of the people who were protesting would have been unhappy about anything that happened, any process, unless President Trump was declared the winner of the election.
Meanwhile, some Democrats worry that a focus on just the Electoral Count Act could reduce urgency to pass through some larger voting rights bills. And Republicans worry Democrats could try and use the process to work in some of the measures they haven't been able to get through Congress. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Still ahead, it is Super Bowl week, and we have a look at a film that tells the story of an underdog who became an NFL quarterback and won the Super Bowl himself. We'll bring you that story right after this. With the big Super Bowl Sunday coming up, football fans are focused on 2 quarterbacks, Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals and Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams. One quarterback who won the Super Bowl for the Rams back in 2000 when they were based in St. Louis was Kurt Warner, who was also named the game's most valuable player. His amazing story of how he went from stocking grocery store shelves to the NFL and becoming a champion is told in the film American Underdog. Here's a look at the making of the movie.
We did begin our careers both doing music videos and commercials and then as documentary filmmakers. So as we went into feature films, we carried that process with us. And so we always sort of explore something as a documentary first, and it becomes a sort of proof of concept piece. And we do that on every film. So the first stop to making the movie and seeing, is this a movie that we could make, was to sit down with Kurt and Brenda and interview them. And that became a 10-minute mini doc.
We asked Kurt and Brenda that question of, what do you see your story as? And Kurt said, I don't see it being about my accomplishments on the football field. It's about my relationship with Brenda and our relationship with Zach. And it's about us fighting for our family. And at that point, John and I looked at each other and like, that's a movie.
It is a rags to riches story to some degree, but there's so much more involved in this story, and the relationships that were built, the relationship that sustained the entire journey are what's key to our story and what I believe is truly going to impact people. And so we needed to find people that saw that in a similar fashion to the way we saw that. John and Andy did that, and thus the reason that we're at this point.
To me, this movie isn't a sports movie. It's about relationship. It's about real life. I've always said that I think people relate more to real life stuff than somebody holding a trophy up and being a champion. But that's the beautiful part about this, that he is a champion, but he was the same person before all this happened.
American Underdog is available now on digital platforms and will be released to DVD within the next 2 weeks. We'll have more on this story on a new edition of Studio 5 tonight, along with a candid conversation with rapper and businessman Lecrae, plus an inside look at the battle against COVID-19 in a new documentary called The First Wave, and a romantic comedy starring Jennifer Lopez and Owen Wilson. It's called Marry Me. You can catch that on Studio 5 on the CBN News Channel tonight at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. You can also download the CBN News app and watch it on demand. Stay with us. We've got a Wednesday word for you coming up next. Coming up, a look at a special event before the big game, the annual Superbowl Breakfast, drawing sellout crowds for messages of hope and presenting the gospel. We're going to hear from last year's winner of the Bart Starr Award for Outstanding Character and Leadership, Demario Davis, about that honor and about his strong faith. We've got it all for you when we come back. Stay with us. As excitement builds for this weekend's Super Bowl, we want you to know about a faith-filled event before the game. The Super Bowl Breakfast features the presentation of the Bart Starr Award, which goes to a player showing outstanding character and leadership. Charlene Aaron recently spoke with last year's winner, Demario Davis, about the honor and his strong faith.
The annual Super Bowl Breakfast is where faith and football meet. Sponsored by Athletes in Action, the outreach has taken place each year since 1988, drawing sellout crowds to hear some of the sports' biggest names. Names like Demario Davis of the New Orleans Saints, known for his faith as well as big plays on the field.
Ever since we came in the league, we learned about the Super Bowl Breakfast and saw that it wasn't just about the game, but it reflected a life of faith, a life of family, and of football.
Highlights of the outreach include messages of hope, complete with a presentation of the gospel. Davis, a 10-year NFL veteran and all-pro linebacker, received last year's Bart Starr Award.
It's a huge honor and a privilege just to be celebrated, by my peers, my coaches, and so many that are critical and such a heavy part of the game. So to receive those accolades means a lot. But I think for me, it's all just reflective of the kingdom, and everything that I do is about being a light for the kingdom. I just want to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant.
Davis's wife, Tamala, says her husband's faith inspires her and their family.
One of the things that I just admire is how I constantly just see him seeking God, not just for one thing, but, in every area of his life, for how he's going out on the mission field, for how he strives to serve our family. Every day I watch him get up and read his Bible.
In 2019, Davis saw the cost of his faith when the NFL fined him $7,000 for wearing a headband that said "Man of God" under his helmet. While the NFL eventually backed down, public support for Davis helped create a Man of God movement. Using the publicity, he sold Man of God headbands to raise money for a local hospital. Davis felt it was important to handle the incident in a way that honored God.
I didn't want it to be a situation where I wanted to be breaking the rules, because the word tells us to submit to authority. But at the same time, I didn't want it to seem as I was hiding and I was just going to bow down to the league policy and be ashamed of my faith.
A faith this lineman attempts to live out every season.
When you just trust God and you lean into him, he'll make everything else work out the way that it's supposed to. That doesn't always mean it's going to be hunky-dory and it's always going to work out nice, and you're always going to have, this this amazing, award-winning, type of thing happen. But it just means it's going to work out in your favor in the end.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
And you can see the hour-long Superbowl breakfast featuring the Bart Starr Award Saturday at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., 6 p.m., and 8 p.m., and Sunday at 10 a.m., 3, 5, and 11 p.m. And that is on the CBN News Channel. You can also find it by downloading the CBN News app and at cbnnews.com. Time now for your Wednesday word, and today's word is strength. Know this: there is strength even in your struggle when you remember you serve a God who oversees your struggle, overrules your struggle, and he overrides your struggle. With that word, I encourage you to make this a wonderful Wednesday, and be sure to have yourself a wonderful rest of the week. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. You can always find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel at any time, as well as online at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing us at the address on your screen, newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right back here, same time tomorrow. We look forward to seeing you then.